At my husband's memorial, I stood surrounded by people who barely looked at me. Most of them were his family, people who never accepted me as his wife. Just as I was about to leave the front row to escape their whispers, a stranger approached me. He placed a sealed envelope in my hand and quietly said, "He wanted you to read this. Alone." My heart nearly stopped. I didn't know what was inside, but I knew one thing for certain. Whatever was written in that envelope was going to change everything. My name is Evelyn Harper, and for more than 20 years I was married to Richard Harper. Richard was strong, charming, and respected in our community. But marrying him came with a price. His family never approved of me. They called me the outsider, whispered that I wasn't good enough, and treated me like an uninvited guest at every family gathering. I tried for years to earn their respect. I cooked meals for holidays, remembered every birthday, and even took care of Richard's daughter from his first marriage when she visited us. Still, it was never enough. The day of the memorial was supposed to be about honoring Richard, but for me, it felt more like standing trial. His daughter, Cassandra, kept shooting me cold looks, as if daring me to shed a tear. His brother, Charles, smirked every time someone offered me condolences, as if my grief wasn't real. I sat in silence, clutching my hands together, forcing myself to stay calm. I thought the worst I had to endure that day was their judgment. But then came the envelope. Its presence felt heavy in my hand. My pulse quickened as I thought about Richard writing it. He knew me better than anyone, and if he had left me a message, it meant he had something important to say. I wondered if it was a final love letter, or something darker, something he couldn't say while he was alive. Cassandra leaned close and whispered sharply, "Funny how he didn't leave anything for you to say today." I didn't respond. I simply held the envelope tighter, as if it were a shield. In that moment, I realized this letter might be my only chance to finally have a voice in this family, a voice Richard himself wanted me to carry. The moment the memorial service ended, I slipped the sealed envelope into my purse. My fingers brushed over it again and again, as people lined up to shake my hand and offer empty condolences. I could barely hear their words. All I could think about was what Richard had left behind for me. The stranger who had given it to me had disappeared into the crowd, leaving no chance for me to ask who he was or how he knew Richard. That only made my chest tighten with more questions. Cassandra noticed the envelope right away. Her sharp eyes followed my movements like a hawk. She smirked and whispered to her cousin, and I could feel the weight of their suspicion. "What is that?" she asked suddenly, her tone dripping with accusation. "Another pity letter for the widow?" I ignored her, but my silence only made her louder. Soon, others began to notice. Richard's brother Charles stepped closer, his towering frame blocking my view of the exit. "Why don't you open it here?" he said, his voice low but commanding. "If Richard had something to say, his family deserves to hear it too." My stomach clenched. They didn't want me to read the letter for answers. They wanted to control whatever message Richard had left behind. I shook my head and forced myself to respond calmly. "Number." He wanted me to read this alone. The room seemed to pause. Even the air felt heavy. Their stares burned into me, some filled with hostility, others with curiosity. I could hear whispers ripple through the crowd, words like secret, money, and property. It struck me that they weren't mourning Richard anymore. They were circling me like vultures, desperate to know what he had entrusted to me. I gripped my purse tighter and excused myself, moving toward the hallway. Cassandra's voice rang out behind me, laced with venom. "Of course, she's always hiding something." A few people chuckled bitterly, their laughter cutting through my already fragile composure. Once I was outside, I took in a deep breath of cold air. For the first time in hours, I felt like I could breathe. But even standing under the gray sky, I couldn't shake the image of Richard's family pressing in on me. They had always treated me as though I were less, but now I felt their contempt sharpening into something else. Fear of what Richard might have revealed. That night, back at the house, I sat at the kitchen table with the envelope in front of me. The house was quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator. My hands trembled as I picked up a letter opener, but I froze. A thought stopped me cold. What if the letter didn't just contain words of comfort? What if Richard had left behind a truth that would tear everything apart? Truth his family had worked so hard to bury. I thought about the years I had spent enduring their cruelty. Every insult, every cold shoulder, every time Cassandra rolled her eyes at me like I didn't belong. I thought about the way Charles once told me, "You'll never really be part of this family. Richard just doesn't see it." My heart pounded as I realized that maybe Richard had seen everything. Maybe this envelope was his way of giving me the justice I never got while he was alive. The next morning, Cassandra showed up at my door. She didn't bother with kindness. "We need to talk," she said flatly, pushing her way inside without waiting for an invitation. She glanced at the envelope sitting on the counter, her lips curling into a sneer. "So, have you read it yet? Or are you saving it until you can twist whatever's inside to your advantage?" Her words stung, but I held my ground. "It's none of your business, Cassandra. This is between Richard and me." Her eyes narrowed. Everything he had is our business. Don't fool yourself into thinking you matter more than his blood. I felt the anger boiling in my chest. For years, I had let her belittle me, but now the letter gave me something I had never had before. Power. And I could see that she knew it too. Her eyes weren't just filled with hatred, they were filled with fear. That moment solidified my resolve. Whatever was in Richard's letter, I would protect it. I wouldn't let Cassandra, Charles, or anyone else twist his words. The more they pushed, the more determined I became. When she finally stormed out, slamming the door behind her, I picked up the envelope once again. This time, my hands didn't shake. I didn't know what I was about to discover, but I knew one thing. Richard had left this message for me, and me alone. And no matter what it contained, I was ready to face it. That night, long after Cassandra had stormed out, I sat in the quiet of my kitchen, staring at the envelope. It lay on the wooden table under the soft glow of a single lamp, almost daring me to open it. I thought about Richard, about how his voice used to calm me when storms rattled the house, how he always reminded me that strength wasn't loud. It was steady. For a long time, I had allowed his family to dictate how I was seen. But this letter, whatever it contained, was his final word, and his final word was mine to carry. I slid my finger under the seal and carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a letter written in Richard's steady handwriting. My chest tightened as I read the first line. If you are holding this, Evelyn, it means I could not protect you in life the way I should have, but I can protect you now. My hands shook, but I kept reading. He wrote about the years of cruelty his family had inflicted on me, how he had seen every insult, every slight, every tear I thought I had hidden. He admitted that he stayed silent too often, afraid of confrontation, but that his silence had weighed heavily on him. Then came the part that made my breath catch. Richard revealed that before his illness worsened, he had updated his will. The house, the savings, and his personal assets were left to me alone. I did not want my family to fight you, Evelyn, he wrote, but if they do, know that I have placed everything in your name. They cannot touch what is rightfully yours. And if they challenge you, you have every right to stand tall, because I chose you. Tears blurred my vision, but a fire sparked inside me. For years I had endured their scorn, always doubting my worth in their eyes. Now Richard's words gave me the validation I had needed for so long. He had chosen me, not just in marriage, but in his final decisions. His family could no longer diminish me. The next morning, as I drank my coffee, a new thought settled in. I had to act. If Richard's family suspected the truth, they would come after me with lawyers, intimidation, and endless manipulation. Cassandra's visit proved they were already circling. I couldn't sit back and wait for their attack. I had to be ready. I called an attorney, a woman named Linda Chavez, recommended to me by a friend. She listened patiently as I explained the situation, then asked me to bring the letter and Richard's documents to her office. Her calm voice reassured me. Evelyn, if what you're telling me is correct, you don't just have a defense. You have the upper hand. Don't let them bully you. For the first time since Richard's death, I felt the ground steady beneath me. I gathered every document Richard had left in the safe, bank statements, property deeds, and the updated will he had mentioned. I placed them in a folder alongside the letter. Holding that folder gave me a strange sense of courage, as though Richard himself were standing behind me, guiding me forward. 2 days later, as expected, Charles showed up unannounced. He didn't even knock politely. He pounded on the door until I opened it. His expression was cold, his eyes sharp. Evelyn, he said, we need to settle the estate. You know this house doesn't belong to you. Richard would have wanted it kept in the family. I straightened my back and met his gaze. Richard was my family, and he made sure I was taken care of. His jaw tightened, but before he could respond, I added, I've spoken to an attorney. If you and Cassandra want to challenge me, be prepared to face the truth. I have it in writing. For a brief moment, I saw something flicker in his eye. Panic. He quickly masked it with a sneer, muttering, we'll see about that, before storming off. That encounter became the turning point for me. No longer was I the quiet, timid woman they believed they could push aside. I had Richard's words, his protection, and now I had the resolve to fight for myself. That evening, I called Linda again and told her everything that had happened. She chuckled softly. Good. You didn't let him intimidate you. Now we move forward on your terms. As I hung up the phone, I realized something important. The envelope had given me more than Richard's love and protection. It had given me my voice back. The fear that once paralyzed me was gone. In its place was a calm determination. I wasn't just going to survive their attacks. I was going to expose the truth Richard wanted the world to know. And as the sun set outside my window, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, I whispered softly, thank you. I won't let you down. The day of the formal reading of Richard's will arrived. My stomach twisted as I walked into the polished wood-paneled conference room where his lawyer, Mr. Daniels, had arranged everything. The air felt heavy with tension, and the smell of leather chairs mixed with faint cologne only made it worse. Cassandra was already there, dressed in a tailored suit, her lips pressed into a smug smile. Charles sat, Beside her, arms crossed, his expression stern, as if he was already preparing to declare victory, a few other relatives lingered in the back, whispering to each other. To them, I was nothing more than a guest in Richard's life, someone they tolerated, but never truly accepted. I took my seat at the end of the table, clutching the folder that held Richard's letter and the documents he had left me. My attorney, Linda, sat to my right. Her calm, steady presence gave me strength, though my heart still pounded against my ribs. Mr. Daniels began by clearing his throat. Thank you all for coming. We are here to read the last will and testament of Richard Whitman. His voice was firm, professional, but I noticed the way Cassandra leaned forward, her eyes sharp, like a predator waiting to pounce. The reading began with the usual legal formalities, but when Mr. Daniels announced that Richard had left the majority of his estate, house, savings, and personal assets, to me, a hush fell over the room. Cassandra's face twisted in disbelief. Charles slammed his hand against the table. This is ridiculous, Charles barked. Richard would never leave everything to her. She manipulated him when he was sick. Linda leaned forward, her tone calm but unshakable. The documents are signed, witnessed, and legally binding. If you're suggesting fraud, you'll need evidence. Cassandra, however, wasn't done. She smirked and pulled out her own folder. Funny you say that, because I have a letter here that tells a very different story. She slid it dramatically across the table, her voice dripping with triumph. This proves Richard intended for the estate to remain with the Whitman family. The room gasped. Even I felt my breath catch, though I quickly steadied myself. Cassandra looked at me with mocking satisfaction, as if she had already won. Linda raised an eyebrow and asked calmly, "And where did you get this so-called letter?" "It was in his desk," Cassandra replied confidently. "Locked away. I found the key." I could almost laugh at the irony. Richard had anticipated this. He knew his family would stoop to forgery and lies if it meant stripping me of security. And now, it was time to let his voice be heard. I placed my hand gently on the folder in front of me, and slowly pulled out the sealed envelope Richard had left me, the one I had opened alone, in the quiet of my kitchen. My voice shook at first, but then grew stronger as I spoke. Richard did leave a letter, but it wasn't hidden in a desk. It was entrusted to me, delivered by someone he trusted, and it doesn't just explain his wishes. It exposes the truth about how you treated me, Cassandra, and you too, Charles. The room grew silent. Cassandra's smirk faltered, though she tried to recover by scoffing. "You're bluffing." Without another word, I handed the letter to Mr. Daniel. He adjusted his glasses and began to read aloud. The room fell into a tense stillness as Richard's words filled the air. He spoke of his regrets for not standing up for me sooner. He detailed the cruelty, the constant attempts to belittle me, and the way his silence weighed on his conscience. He wrote that he had updated his will specifically because he knew his family would try to erase me after his death. And then came the words that struck the deepest blow. If my family is hearing this now, know that I leave everything to Evelyn, not out of obligation, but out of love. She was my true partner, the one who stood by me when you would not. If you challenge her, you challenge me. Gasps echoed around the room. A few relatives lowered their heads in shame. Cassandra's face drained of color, her confidence shattered. Charles muttered angrily under his breath, but had no ground to stand on. Linda leaned toward me and whispered, "That letter is airtight. They don't have a case." I met Cassandra's furious eyes and said softly, but firmly, "Richard chose me. Not you. Not your lies. Me." For the first time in years, the power shifted. I wasn't the outsider being judged or dismissed. I was the one holding the truth, and they could no longer twist it. Cassandra pushed her chair back and stood abruptly, her hands trembling. "This isn't over," she hissed before storming out. Charles followed, muttering curses, but their departure only underscored their defeat. The rest of the room remained quiet. Some avoided my gaze. Others looked at me with something new in their eyes. Respect. Perhaps even guilt. I had walked into that room bracing for humiliation, but instead, I had walked out with dignity and Richard's final gift. Undeniable proof of his love and loyalty. As I gathered my papers and prepared to leave, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The letter had done more than secure my future. It had finally silenced those who had tried to erase me. Walking out of that conference room felt like stepping into fresh air after being trapped underground. For months, I had been weighed down by grief and the quiet fear that Richard's family would succeed in erasing me from his life. But the letter, his final words to them, had not only protected me, it had set me free. When I got home that evening, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, the house silent except for the ticking of the old wall clock. For the first time since Richard's passing, the silence didn't feel crushing. It felt safe. I unfolded the letter once more, running my fingers over the ink. His words weren't just about property or legal matters. They were about us, about the bond we built despite the judgment, the love we carried, even when others tried to deny it. In the weeks that followed, the ripple effects of that day became clear. Cassandra avoided me entirely. She couldn't bear to face me, not after her scheme had collapsed so publicly. Charles made a half-hearted attempt to intimidate me through phone calls, muttering about lawyers and unfinished business. But Linda shut that down quickly with firm warnings and the threat of legal action. The more he pushed, the more it became clear he had no evidence, no leverage. Eventually, even his bluster faded into silence. But what surprised me most were the smaller changes within the family. A few relatives, those who had kept their distance, those who had believed Cassandra's bitter words, began to soften. One afternoon, Richard's cousin Marianne stopped by my house with a bouquet of flowers. She stood on the porch, shifting nervously, before finally saying, "I owe you an apology. I believed things that weren't true. That letter, it opened my eyes. I didn't know what to say at first. Part of me wanted to close the door and protect myself from more hurt, but I also thought of Richard, of his wish that I be seen for who I was, not the lies others had painted. I accepted the flowers and invited her inside. It wasn't easy, and it didn't erase years of cold shoulders, but it was a start. Slowly, I began to reclaim my life, piece by piece. I poured myself into the garden Richard and I had planted together. Each morning, I would water the roses and tend to the herbs, remembering how he used to joke that I had the patience of a saint whenever I coaxed new blooms from the soil. Friends from church rallied around me too, inviting me to lunches, offering company on quiet evenings, reminding me that I wasn't alone. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of gold, I sat on the porch with Richard's letter in my lap. I thought about the lesson it carried, not just for Cassandra and Charles, but for me as well. For too long, I had allowed their cruelty to chip away at my confidence. I had second-guessed my place in Richard's life, wondering if I truly belonged. But his final words left no room for doubt. I was his partner, his choice, his love. That truth was more valuable than any inheritance. The memorial service replayed in my mind often, the way a stranger had handed me that envelope, the way whispers had followed me as I slipped away to open it alone. At the time, I had been trembling, unsure of what I would find. Now, I realized Richard had orchestrated it all to give me strength when I would need it most. That moment wasn't just about protecting me from his family. It was about ensuring that I never forgot my worth. Months later, when the legal matters were fully settled, Linda invited me for lunch to celebrate. She raised her glass of iced tea and said, "You know, Evelyn, you showed more courage than most people ever could. You stood your ground against a family that wanted to erase you, and you did it with grace." I smiled, feeling the warmth of her words. "I didn't do it alone," I said, tapping the letter in my purse. "Richard gave me the strength, even after he was gone." That was the truth of it. Love had outlasted manipulation, outlasted greed, outlasted even death. The letter wasn't just paper and ink. It was a bridge between Richard and me, proof that even in his absence, he stood beside me. Looking back now, I realized that day in the lawyer's office wasn't just the climax of a legal battle. It was the moment I stepped out from the shadows of other people's judgments and stood fully in the light of my own life. I was no longer the woman they dismissed as an outsider. I was Evelyn Whitman, the wife Richard loved and trusted, and I carried his truth with me. Whenever I feel doubt creeping in again, I open that letter, not because I need validation from Richard's family, but because it reminds me of the woman he saw me to be. Strong, loyal, worthy. And that is the lesson I carry forward. Never let anyone else decide your worth, because love, real love, leaves no room for lies. In the end, the inheritance, the house, the legal battles, those things mattered far less than the realization Richard left me with. His final gift was not just security, but clarity. He showed me that no matter how loud others are, the truth will always speak louder if you have the courage to stand by it.